Hello everyone, welcome to the third tutorial video on this series. And so today I'm going to show you a lot of the details that we haven't gotten to discuss in the second tutorial on how to best use Jupyter Notebook and what we can actually really do with it. Okay, so I'm just gonna open a terminal on my Windows machine and then I'm gonna type Jupyter Notebook to get the server up and running. Alright. And so that's the window that popped up. Under desktop and under Jupyter Notebook, I have a tutorial folder there ready for us. You can go and set that up on your own. I'm sure you can do that. Then I'm going to make a new Python notebook file. I'm going to rename that to 3 tutorial. And then I'm going to show you what we're capable of doing inside of this notebook. So first thing to do is to understand that these cells can be used in various different ways. And so the first thing that you need to understand is that it can be used to render or embed code into that cell, which then runs on the kernel, or we can make this into a Markdown file. So right now I've actually clicked on the file, so it's kind of active and there's a green border around it. But if I press escape on my keyboard, it turns blue and I've exited the cell, and I can make this into a Markdown cell by pressing M on the keyboard, and it changes it to that. So it no longer has a line tag associated to it. So now when I press enter, I go into the cell, the green border is back again, but this is now a different type of cell. I can do Markdown. In other words, I can type some HTML, I can make a list, I can do many different types of things, and that's what we're going to be discussing here today. Before we go that far, let me just escape that cell again by pressing escape on the keyboard. Alright, and to delete that cell, I can just press X. Now, it automatically generated a new cell, but perhaps if I had two cells and I go back to the first, press escape and X to delete the cell, I only have one cell left. Okay, so that's one of the things that you should be able to do, is to delete cells. You might not want to delete the cell if there's content in it, because it's going to be really hard to recover and probably impossible to recover. So what I would suggest is just be really careful with your keyboard when you're working in this notebook. I'm going to press escape, right? Then I'm going to create a new cell above this first cell by pressing A on the keyboard. Alright, so that cell is now the one that has been placed on top of the cell at the bottom. I can also place a cell below the cell on top by pressing B for below on the keyboard, and now it created a cell below my first cell. Okay, and then I can just use my up and down keys to navigate up or down on the notebook in the cells. Alright, so that's the basic way of navigating around the notebook. Once we want to enter some text over here, or let me just change that to a Markdown cell by pressing M on the keyboard and then entering the cell, I can then start to type some Markdown. So the Markdown here works a little bit differently than in most other cases. The single hash basically just stands for a very big heading. So this is a heading, a large font, and I'm just going to type here heading. I can also subheadings by having two hashtags first, subheading. I can then have three hashtags is a subheading. Alright, and I think it can go up to 4 or 5. Sub heading. I think 5 will be overkill, but let's try it. Okay, it still works, but it seems that it has italicized this text. Alright, and I can keep going. But once I reach about 6 hash symbols, that's no longer considered Markdown. Something has just changed. So just keep in mind, you can go up to about 6. All right. So if I run that, it's going to do that. Okay. So that was Shift Enter to execute that code over there. There's a lot of other things that I can actually go ahead and do right now. All right, so let's go ahead and change that to a markdown cell, escape, and then make sure you're outside of the cell and you press M for markdown. You can also go ahead and manually change the cell type by clicking on the cell, right, like that, going to cell, and then changing your options over here. So cell type, you can leave it as code or markdown or raw NB convert. So if you press on code, it changes it back to a coding cell, right? So if you don't want that, in my case, I want it to be markdown, I can click on markdown. So another thing I can do is I can create bold text by having double asterisk symbols, and then inside of that double asterisk, I can write bold, any bold text that you prefer. Alright, and once rendering that, the text should appear bold. So it's hard to see because I don't have like ordinary text around it. So let me just include some ordinary text before. Alright, so this is ordinary text. This down here is bold text. And I can also go ahead and do italics by only using single asterisk symbol for italic text. Okay. And so this is what you're going to get. Okay, let me just put some line breaks so that it's more clear. And so the way you do that is by using HTML break tags. There we go. So we have ordinary text, bold text, and italic text. We can also do the same thing by using underscores. All right, so let me just change this cell to a markdown cell. Now I have 4 underscores, 2 underscores to the left for bold text, and 2 underscores to the right for closing the bold text. Okay, and so I'm going to need a line break. If I want to type italics, I'm just going to use single underscores for italics. A line break, perhaps. Alright, so that works in the same way, except that you're using underscores instead of asterisks. Another thing that we can do is we can create a line break, actually, or a line, a horizontal line in our notebook by having 3 asterisks, just like that, within a markdown cell. So by rendering that, it might be very difficult to see right away, but there is a little gray line appearing right over there in my notebook. All right, so that creates this line. That's 3 asterisks. We can do a hell of a lot more. It really depends on how you want to structure your notebook. We can do lists. Those are quite interesting because you can refer using hyperlinks within the same document, much as the same as what you would do when you're using HTML in the browser to build a website. The first easy way in which we can make a list is, for example, by using the markdown cell and then itemizing this list by using 1 and then a closing bracket only. And then we would say this is an item, this is a second item. Let me just say this is a first item, and this is a second item. And so you can keep going depending on what your needs are. And to render that again, Shift, Enter. Okay, and let's change that to a markdown cell. Escape first to exit that cell, and then okay. So we can do indentation as well by just having a greater than symbol and then saying this indented text. All right, and so it appears to be more to the right than the other list items down above it. Next up, I'm going to show you how to do a more intensive sort of list, a bulleted list. Let's change this cell to a markdown cell once again. And to have bullet lists, you can really easily just use a minus symbol with a space and then your text. So this is a bullet item. But we can also achieve the same thing by using only an asterisk. This is another bullet item. Okay, and so that again does the same thing. A much better approach would be to include hyperlinks. So if I want one list item, I also just make sure this is a markdown cell, I can just type the number, the item number, together with a period and a space. Then I can give it a name. Let's say you have an introduction heading somewhere in your notebook file, and I want it to refer to that introduction heading when I click on it and take me there. And then I'm going to put a line break. And now I want a sub item. So if you want a sub item, you just make sure to hit tab, and then make sure that you appropriately number your sub item. In this case, let's call this sub item 1 underscore, well, let's just say sub item. Yeah, and then again, we want to reference that to somewhere in this notebook. So I'm going to call that sub item. Okay, but I want to reference that in a hyperlink to a heading in this document. So that's something that I might want to do. All right, so let me just make another sub item for the second heading. 2.1 sub item. Okay, but obviously I need to distinguish sub item 1 and sub item 2, so I'm just going to call that sub item 1 and sub item 2 with a break. All right, and then when I render that, I get this nice clickable link. Okay, so there's something wrong happened here. That's because sub item 2 is not prepended with a hash. Okay, so that's why. All right, I'm going to render that. Sub item 2 will not go into a new tab. And so how can I use that? What I would like to do is I would like to have an introduction in Markdown form. And let me actually just put a cell above that by pressing again escape and then A, enter to get into the cell. And I'm going to just generate some really lengthy text over here, because I want to illustrate to you that it's going to take me down to this page, introduction, once I click on this introduction link over here. So I'm going to import lorem text. That just means it's like dummy text from the Python lorem text library. And I'm going to generate about 1,000 dummy words. All right. I'm going to then change the cell just so that it doesn't have any scroll functionality over here, so that we can really see the full effect of what I'm about to explain. All right, so to do that, I'm just going to go to current options, toggle scroll. Okay, so that just makes it really horrible to go and read through all of that. You're not going to want to do that. But what I want to illustrate is that there's an introduction heading over here with a single hash. All right, so that's a heading, a very big heading. And I'm going to go back up to where we had defined our hyperlink list, and I'm going to click on introduction, and it should take me to introduction, right? Okay, so that's the whole idea behind that, is for you to better structure your Jupyter Notebook files and documents, so that it becomes a lot easier to navigate, for your audience to enjoy your content much better. Okay, so if I click on sub item, nothing's gonna happen because I don't have sub item headings in this document. So let's actually go ahead and change that. Okay, so if you have a sub item hyperlink defined somewhere as a heading in your Jupyter Notebook file, as I have down here, right, under introduction, then I have sub items. Although this is a smaller heading, because I have 2 hash symbols over here, I will still be referencing to the same heading once I click on this hyperlink. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that. So this is sub item 1, and I clicked on it, and now I'm down at the bottom of the document. Okay, cool. So that's great. We can do quite a lot at this point so far. Let's discuss a couple of other really useful Markdown tricks that I think everyone should really use when interacting with their Jupyter notebooks. So one of the very important things, especially to the maths community out there, is that we can actually define LaTeX without having to specify that we're doing LaTeX. All that needs to happen is this needs to be a Markdown cell. And so here's a code snippet of LaTeX code, which really just renders into beautiful mathematical symbols. So it's, as you can see, I'm writing an equation, so I have begin and end tags in LaTeX form for equations. And then I have this expression e to the power of x equals then the sum from ranging from index I equals 0 up to infinity of a fraction. This fraction is just the reciprocal of the factorial times x to the power of I. Okay, so that is literally the definition of e to the power of x, the function e to the power of x. So if I render that by pressing shift and then enter, as long as I'm in a markdown environment for this cell, I can see how beautiful that turns out to be. Okay, so that's great because we can use LaTeX inside of Jupyter Notebook documents, which is why it is so useful, because we can write beautiful equations, and then we can also do a bit of code in the next cell, and then we can move on to the next cell, write more markdown and all these types of things. Another thing that I think is quite useful to know is that, once again, in markdown form, we can actually define quite nice tables. So this is just a piece of code that I copied just to illustrate to you. This is how easy it is to define a table. So I have pipe symbol, then I have space, and I have just a word like a heading in the table. Okay, let's just say this is heading 1, this is heading 2, and then I can go and put some content over here, content, and some more content, and then, well, over here you can see that I just have a line that separates the two headings. Just to make it a bit more beautiful, you might want to add, you know, make sure that they are aligned, these tables, and you could just use, you know, anything like a space. Really, it won't really affect the layout of this table, right? So I've just really spaced my table into such a way that, you know, it doesn't really look, it looks like a table. Still looks like a table, right? And then if I render this by having, you know, holding down shift and pressing enter, it gives me heading 1, heading 2, more content, and content. Okay, so that's great. I can write tables, I can write equations, I can write markdown, I can do a whole lot of things within Jupyter Notebook. And we haven't even yet gotten to the point of embedding any HTML, CSS, JavaScript, anything like that. We haven't really done any Python. We've just looked at the bare bones of how can we interact to make our documents look a lot better once we start developing our project into more detail. So yeah, so that's it for this video, I think. I'll see you in the next one.